You're listening to the Valley Current.
What's the typical retirement age for a tax professional in your field? What would you say that is?
It varies a lot based on the person's health. So I've seen people who close down at 60 or 70, and I know people who are still doing tax preparation at 90.
Really?
Yes.
90 years old?
90 years old.
I mean, I have to tell you, I don't think I would trust. I hate to say this because today there was an important ruling. I put it out on LinkedIn where a federal circuit judge that has been on the bench, very smart woman, for like 50 years, it was recommended that she be suspended from the practice of being a judge, which she has lifetime tenure. She's 96 years old, but a number of people within that court, and it's a relatively small court of appeals in Washington, D.C. It's called the Federal Circuit. It just deals with patent appeals and a few other things. And they were saying she's just not 100% there anymore. And they were telling her she's got to retire. She's 96 years old. She's been on the bench for like 50 years since the age of like 46. I think I've got that right. She's one of the oldest federal judges still sitting, still practicing continuously as a judge. And she contested the request that she resigned, saying, I'm fine. These are just people that are discriminating against me because I'm old and it takes me a while to get up on the bench and takes me a while to leave. And, I don't snap to it as fast. And she's fighting it. They issued a 300-page report today, 300. Most of it was exhibits that had all the instances where she was just not turning stuff around as fast. And I have to say, look, as you get older, you're just not as fast. Let's just accept I was a faster swimmer when I was in my 20s than my 30s, than my 40s, than my 50s, and so on. I was a faster hiker. I was a faster bike rider. I was probably even a faster thinker. I had more fluid intelligence, but now I have more crystallized intelligence. That's a big difference. I have more wisdom. I think she has more wisdom. And
my first thought here is that maybe she can just reduce her caseload. Maybe she's taking too much on. And another point is you can't generalize. For instance, I just received an email on the internet with a photo of Mitch McConnell, who's 81, and right next to a photo of Mick Jagger, who's 80. And it's night and day. Now, this inspired me to go look at Mick Jagger's diet and exercise program. And it's amazing. It's inspirational. This guy takes 3 trailers of exercise equipment with him wherever he goes.
3 trailers?
3 trailers of gym equipment.
Wow. I mean, I know he's a big vegan, and I know he's fathered like probably hundreds of kids. I mean, it's a funny story, but I met the woman who inspired the song Brown Sugar, who was apparently the mother of one of his children that went on to do great things. The child went on to do great things. This woman went on to do great things. She lives in France now. I won't reveal her name, but it's known. And, Mick Jagger was quite a romancer. I mean, I don't know what the right word is for it, but, we used to call it a hound dog. He would just take advantage of whatever opportunity was out there, and it's well known. And he supports all of these children that he's produced, but he clearly has aged a lot better than Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell had a moment, I think, earlier this week where he looked like he was going to have a stroke. He was in the middle of a press conference and he just stopped, and they had to walk him off the stage. And then they brought him back on. But this judge, and I'm just trying to remember her name. I want to say it's Judge Moore. She's fighting this view, and there is this notion of senior status in which you can take a reduced caseload. But I think she's refused to go on senior status, and I don't really understand why. I don't know whether she thinks that, I want to get access to all the cases or what her thinking is, but she definitely wants to continue to work, and people want presumably her out. And she's claiming they want her out because she is kind of in the minority view, generally speaking. Like she's in the minority view on things. And if that's true, that's sort of a form of First Amendment violation. They're essentially discriminating against her based on her age and based on her viewpoint, her First Amendment viewpoint. Now, my question that I raised is, to what degree is it likely that the Supreme Court will get this case? And then what will be their decision? Because it's got to apply to them as well as they get older, because they have life tenure too. So does that mean that some commission, which is what happened here, some committee of people inside the federal circuit can do essentially a witch hunt of some sort and say, here's all these instances where we don't think she's as productive, so she should leave, right? I mean, it's an interesting question. If you look at it from the bigger picture, this all came to mind because you said there are tax professionals in their 90s that are still competent to produce tax returns, and they're doing that, right?
Indeed. I had a conversation with such a tax professional who was contemplating selling their business to me. And yes, they seemed very competent and happy to take this profession into their twilight years. Now, there's a lot of other professions where you get kicked out when you turn 60. There's firms that have mandatory retirement for partners who are not employees and are not covered by age discrimination protections. And they have mandatory retirement at 60. Is that right?
Is that, for example, like E&Y and some of the bigger players, PwC and some of the bigger firms?
Yes, it is.
And I mean, is their view of life that they have to do this because they have younger people that are just chomping at the bit to get access to the corner office?
Well, if they only hire 22-year-olds, then they need to somehow motivate those workers to put in long hours, and to open partnership seats, they need to get the older folks to move on.
Well, I know in Britain, in the United Kingdom, typically lawyers retire at the age of 50, and most are definitely retiring by the age of 55. So that's a very short career span compared to the US, where I think most lawyers don't retire until maybe 65. And now many, many lawyers are pushing beyond 70, beyond 75, beyond 80, depending, of course, as you say, on their health and what their colleagues think and what their book of business is. Because for a lot of them, they're like, if you force me out, I take my book of business with me and I go to a place that's friendly to older people. And I can harness the same younger talent at another platform. And a lot of that lateral movement happens based upon whether they feel cared for or they don't feel cared for, right? I mean, that's what happens in big firms all the time, where older people just say, if you don't allow me to stay, then I'll leave and I'll take my clients with me. They trust me. They're not necessarily going to trust. This whole idea of a sabbatical is kind of a subtle way of making the firm more of the owner of the client. Because if someone in their 60s takes a sabbatical, there have to be other partners that can work with that client while the person is on a sabbatical for 9 months or a year. So the sabbatical idea is actually baked into succession. It's like an idea of getting the clients used to the fact that he went on a teaching sabbatical for a year. You're going to have to deal with somebody else at the firm. That's really what sabbaticals are about, as much as they say, oh, they're about refreshing people and the like. I don't see it that way at all. But it's interesting that as these AI tools start to make their way into firm practices, are we going to see some different approach at some level? Certainly at the low end, I would imagine the AI tools are going to get better and better for do-it-yourselfers, right? If we just logically say what can happen at the low end, if the tool allows you just to press a few buttons and automation takes over.
A part of this really speaks to the importance for us as professionals to keep abreast of the technology that we work with. I had the fortune, even though none of my employers nor the Big Four particularly had placed any value on it, to have a strong background in IT before I transitioned to accounting. And that, for instance, lets me do a lot of the IT for my firm myself, as opposed to being dependent upon somebody in Bangalore, India, to come in virtually and do the IT. But just this week, I had two older computers that were misbehaving in different ways. One computer that's quite important to my systems started beeping a lot. And it turned out to be a device disconnect, connect, beep. The other, also a Windows computer, was having internet trouble. And they turned out to have, it was remarkable, they turned out to have the same fix. And the fix was to go into Windows setup and turn off fast boot. Now, who would think that turning off fast boot would cause a computer to stop this crazy making beeping, incessant beeping every couple of seconds? Well, you got to turn off fast boot for the device drivers to refresh.
Wow.
And then the internet is dependent on device drivers too. And you may have software or systems that make the device drivers update. But if you don't turn off fast boot, the default is to have fast boot, but that doesn't refresh the drivers. There's value in keeping abreast to technology. And as the automation increases, being able to know things like this or figure things like this out, I think is important. As you leave a large firm and start your own firm, who's going to do the IT? So I think, again, being abreast of technology is crucial in fields like tax and law.
Yeah, I mean, IT is something people think is going to be automated as well, but we all know that's kind of not really here yet. There really isn't. I mean, obviously you can go with a software as a service platform for a lot of stuff, but I imagine a lot of your tools are actually right on that computer that you rely on. They're literally right on that machine, right? I mean, it's not like you're actually in the cloud for everything, right?
It's not. And the tools need to integrate. Typically, you have a system that does taxes pretty well or even great, but it doesn't do the planning. It doesn't do the client communications. It doesn't, or maybe you can get someone that plugs in and does the planning, but it only does a mediocre job. It doesn't do a great job. So now you've got 5 or 6 different disparate systems that need to talk to each other. And you bring in a new client and you need to somehow add that client to all 6 systems in order to make things work. So
when you look at these tools, just generally speaking, do you see them moving in a direction where the low end will continue to get better and better for people that want to do it themselves, or maybe with a little bit of help, but basically the automation tool is spinning enough information, but the high end is getting more and more complex, and these tools just can't get the nuance of the data or get enough breadcrumbs to be sort of extracted to understand.
A lot of the migration and the competitiveness and the value at the high end migrating in terms of customer service. So, for example, I sometimes get situations where I don't know the correct answer, but the software company has talked to dozens of other professionals who also were in this situation, and they know what the common solution is. So I call them and I'm not allowed to ask them, what's the tax law in this situation? But I am allowed, and they are allowed to answer when I ask, what do most other users do? And so being able to get an English-speaking support person without an undue delay and without a matrix of voicemail. I've had other companies where I would need to spend 6 hours on voicemail hold before actually reaching live support. But if I can get a live person within a minute and they are willing to tell me what most other CPAs do in this common situation, that's a huge help. That saved me hours of tax research, of legal research that I would otherwise have had to do.
Right. When you look at the future and you look at your own sort of career, you've been in this for a while, you're experienced. Do you say to yourself, this is another 30 years? Do you look at your own career and say, I'll be at this for another 30 years? Like I'll be building a practice, adding staff, adding people. I know you've added some other people. Congratulations. Do you say to yourself, I could see myself working into my 90s and 80s just the same way that that gentleman that you were talking with has been working that long? Do you see that for yourself?
I'm doing my best to follow Mick Jagger's style and your advice about drinking water and swimming regularly.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that you have to actually lose. The other thing you have to do, which we're all bad at, including me, is you have to lose weight going into your aging. So like you have to continuously be getting the right nutrition with the right fasting. And Mick Jagger, of course, is just so skinny. I think his waist is probably like 26 inches or something. It's tiny. He's got just a really tiny body. He's very lanky. If you look at his vegan diet, I'm sure he's doing a lot of fasting. He does a lot of meditation. I mean, he's kind of a health guru. And I think he is losing his voice. I listened to a recent live record. I wasn't there, but I listened to the recording and I thought, man, he's just not hitting the notes anymore. But of course, he's Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones are still operating and they've got to be a billion-dollar producer, I mean, in terms of their records. And he's probably had one of the longest careers, and I don't think he's going to give it up. I think he's going to continue to do it for as long as he could stand on the stage to do it, right?
That's my plan.
Oh, that's your plan. Okay. So you would continue to do it, and you would see it as, because you do arrange, you do complicated stuff, but you will do an individual tax return as well, right? Won't you? If people are willing to pay whatever your minimum fee is?
Yeah, this is true.
I mean, what is the minimum? What is the typical minimum that someone expects to pay?
We don't really have a hard minimum. We've done pro bono acts for people we really like who are doing good things and we want to support. And so there is no set in stone minimum, but we probably charge a bit more than the H&R Block or equivalent firms.
So what is the price range typically for people that want to know kind of what they can expect to pay for an individual service?
I'm not comfortable giving a hard number until I see the tax return. And it's not just a matter of price. So it really needs to be a good fit. If we don't think it's a good fit or for us or for the client, we would encourage the client to go elsewhere. And in order to determine that, we need to see the tax return. Typically, our clients consider us a value and tend to use us for many years. So we try not to get into relationships where we're just going to do 1 year tax return and the client might not be happy and might move on. That would not be the ideal situation. And we'd rather spend time with people for whom we can make a big difference and who will keep using our services into the future.
Right. So you want to select clients that you have more of a relationship with than clients that are transactional. Like there probably are many clients that are just like, do this tax return for me because I'm living in California right now, but next year I might move to Chicago and then I'll get somebody in Chicago to do it because I don't know, what are the rules? Could you file an Illinois tax return for that client? You could certainly file the federal return for them, even though they're in Chicago, right? If they moved.
The states are all reciprocal. So anybody who's allowed to prepare and sign a tax return as preparer in any state can do taxes in all 50 states. But
well, that's news, because I thought that people who were in your profession were like lawyers are barred to practice law in other states without a license or without a co-counsel or an associated counsel or what's called pro hac vice, except perhaps in arbitration cases. And even that might be subject to some state by state thing. Whereas you're saying, no, look, if I have a client, this is an important point because I don't think people realize this. I have a client that I start with in California and they stay and then they move. I can continue to do the federal work. I can continue to do the work in Illinois, in New York, wherever. I can continue to do that work. And, you know, the states accept that, right?
Yes, they do. Now, accountants are limited in the practice of accounting and auditing. So to the extent that if I got an inquiry to do an audit in some other state, I would turn it down. I would not be allowed to do that.
Oh, an audit, like if New York was auditing the return, the state return, they would say you need to be admitted as a CPA or tax professional, tax preparer in New York. And
no, I actually can do tax audit representation in any state, but I cannot do financial audits in states in which I'm not licensed.
So a tax audit in New York.
I could do that. I could do that, but I would not.
Okay.
It's just not practicable to fly to New York for a meeting with an auditor. And I do not know enough about New York state tax law. So I would refer that one to a New Jersey firm I know and have referred clients to in the past, and they've done a good job.
Right. Because I think a lot of people don't realize that, well, people that move, they may or may not satisfy whatever the rules are for establishing residency and citizenship and domicile and all the rest out of one state and into another. And they could end up with, you know, 2 different states or maybe even 3 different states all claiming that taxes are owed as though they're actually resident and domiciled in that state. Like a high tax state like New York or California might well compete with a low tax state like Arizona or, you know, some of the others that are lower that are out there, or even a no tax state. And that fight can result in multiple audits depending on how many different states are involved, right?
Yeah, that's true. And it's not only the residency, but also the income sourcing. So if you have a rental property in California, you're going to pay California tax no matter which state you're resident of. Similarly, if you sell a business in California, California is going to want a piece of the tax. So what is a business in California if a business is doing sales on the internet? Now you're in very complex territory.
Right.
And if you're in that situation, I'm happy to help.
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting because I think the Wall Street Journal went to an H&R Block, a Liberty Tax, all of these franchise operators with the same set of facts. And they did a story about getting like 6 or 8 or 10 different tax returns as a result of these 10 different franchises, 10 different brands, all basically had a different view. It wasn't that sophisticated. It was, I think, a business return. It was not an individual return, and it was more sophisticated than just a simple W-2 type return. And they got like 10 different answers on whether taxes were owed. And their argument was if 10 different franchised operators who are doing volumes of tax work are getting 10 different answers, there must be something wrong with the tax system. There must be something wrong with the tax code. If there's 10 different answers from 10 different, quote unquote, professionals, for what they said was not that sophisticated. They were willing to do the work. The franchise brand was willing to do the work. I should find that story because I thought they made a really good point.
If you search for a title, why you can't trust the IRS. I believe the author's name was Pilla, Pilla. You'll get a discussion of this issue that's fascinating. Yes, there's something wrong with the tax code. There's more than one thing wrong with the tax code. There's a lot of things wrong with the tax code.
I mean, will it ever get fixed? I guess is the open question. And then how? Because we've talked about tax simplification so often, so many times, and nothing really happens. Nothing really produces a new sort of simplified postcard way of doing your taxes or simplified online way of doing your taxes or any sort of simplification. And I think there are a lot of people that think, well, maybe there just needs to be a completely different approach than what we have now. And I don't know what that would be. I have no idea what that would look like, but people keep talking about it, right?
On a related topic, why did the Roman Empire collapse?
I don't know, probably for the lack of tax collection, right?
And that was a big piece of it. If you can't collect taxes and you can't pay the army, then the barbarians walk right through the gate. And right. The business owners might even welcome the barbarians when they come.
Right. Well, you could argue that maybe that's where we're headed. I mean, look, the other protests that you could argue that Trump could have indirectly inspired among his base is just don't pay your taxes. Like in protest, do what the Patriots did. No taxation without representation. Just don't storm the Capitol. Just don't pay your taxes. Like, to me, he probably had a First Amendment right to say it. It doesn't sound very American to say it. He could have said it. They could have followed that advice and said, I took the advice of the president, I'm not paying my taxes. That wouldn't have been a good defense in federal court for criminal tax evasion, but it would have been a better outcome for him. I don't think he would have been charged with a crime. It wouldn't have caused the murder. I mean, literally, there was a murder or a shooting or a homicide that occurred on that day as a result of the protest. He could have been charged with felony murder for if he's really caused that riot to occur. And there are a lot of people that think he did, or that he amplified it, and he conspired to do it. And a killing resulted. That unlawful killing, or even lawful killing for that matter, is part of a felony murder. And if he engaged in a felony that indirectly caused it, he's guilty of that murder. Now, they didn't charge him for that. Jack Smith didn't charge him for that, but I suppose he could have. Tell people how they can reach you by phone and by email.
It's always a pleasure to chat with you in these podcasts. I can be reached at srabin@srabin.com. My cell phone is 408-887-6433. And my website is www.taxservice2u.com.
Thanks, Steve. You've been great. Talk to you later. Take care.
You too. Be well.
Bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.